I'm Andi Smiley, your friendly podcast guide. I help you elevate your podcast and feel less alone while you're doing it. Today, I'm sharing a conversation I had with Alexa Lewis, who is a veteran in the creative space. She and her family have a very successful YouTube channel, and they also have a kid podcast. I can't wait for you to hear how their YouTube audience translated to their podcast listeners. At the end of the episode, I'll recap all of the things I learned from Alexa during our conversation, so you don't have to take notes, unless you want to. Here's my lovely conversation with Alexa. Alexa, thank you so much for being on the Friendly Podcast Guide today. Before we dive into talking about Lively Lewis Stories, your kid podcast, I want to introduce you to my listeners a little bit by asking you some slightly random questions.
Love it. I'm here for it. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad you're here. Okay, the first question is, what is the last podcast you listened to?
Ooh, well,
For
me,
the kids.
My taste in podcasts, what my kids listen to, obviously, are very different. The last one I watched was To Live and Die in LA.
Wait, is that true crime? I'm assuming
Yes,
that is.
it's a true crime.
Okay.
I love all true crimes.
Do you live in LA?
I live in Orange County, so I'm really close. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's too scary.
It
I cannot
is.
do that.
I mean, I'm a homebody, so like they're gonna have to go out of their way to get me. So I'm pretty safe.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, see, and I can't do true crime. They literally give me nightmares. So I stay away from true crime. But I know so many people love it. And it's interesting. It's fascinating. But then I have nightmares and can't sleep.
All the Wondery ones are my jam. Like they do such good ones that are like really well produced, which I really like, because otherwise like my attention span just goes out. But honestly, I do more audiobooks than I do podcasts. But I love just audio listening. For me is amazing.
It's the best way to listen as a mom.
It is.
Like you can be listening and still doing something else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm listening constantly to a book going on or a podcast, whatever's going on, whatever I'm deep into.
Yeah, I agree. I do. Well, truly, for me, it just depends. It depends on what I want. I feel like I go through audiobook phases, but I kind of like the physical book because I mostly read right before bed.
Yes.
And something about holding a book makes me tired. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. I listen during the day to one book and then I read my Kindle every single night before I go to bed. Like I just can't get enough.
I love it. Ooh, I was going to ask you, have you listened to Cold? That's a Wondery true crime. So Cold is very scary and I couldn't handle it. But it's cold cases and it's actually from one of my old coworkers at KSL.
Yes, I have listened to this. Wait,
yeah, it's
wait,
really
your old
intense and I
coworker
couldn't
makes
listen to
this?
Dave Colley. I know, he's a rock star.
Cool. Yeah, I
actually got to interview him on my show.
So now I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that. I gotta go. Bye.
I promise it will be there when we're done with this interview. And truly, we had such a good conversation, Dave and I, that I think the actual raw audio was 45 minutes long and I had to cut it down to 20. So maybe I'll do like a bonus episode of the whole thing because it was fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I got to do that.
You should do
That'll
that.
be a
You got to
bonus
make your
episode at some
mental
point.
note. Yeah, that would be so cool.
I know, seriously. Oh, I've got a notebook. I'll just write it down. Okay, next question. What is a simple life hack that is making your life better right now?
Ooh, great question. So we have a ton of different things that we, for some reason, keep saying yes to, which is just kind of how my husband and I operate. We love trying new things. We love when an opportunity comes, we say yes. Our biggest thing right now is we use an app and a web page called Trello, and it just keeps us on track. It is the only thing that keeps us from losing our minds with different people that we work with and things we have to do. So I would say that's probably just having something that keeps your mind outside of your mind, all of the things that I have to do elsewhere. Because if it's in here, it's done for. It's just gets too intermixed.
Totally. Okay. Umbrella, broad view.
Yeah.
How do you use your Trello?
So we have different ones on there. So we have Lively Lewis Stories, Lively Lewis Family, and Lively Lewis Show. And so what's great is that on each one of those, we have all of our people who work for us are on there too. So our script writer to our editor to our sound mixer, everyone's on these. So there's like an actual like column. So it's like, hey, here's my idea. I write all the ideas out. Then I give it to the story writer. And then the story writer can see all my ideas, and then she takes it and drags it over. Like it's like a physical drag, which I love. And the person knows, oh, it's now here. It's time for the production. So like Jason, our sound mixer, or Ryan, our video editor, can go, oh, they're ready. And then he can drag it into like processing. It is the coolest thing. Like I am so impressed by it.
Okay, maybe that's one of my projects is figuring out how to use Trello.
Shout out to
You
Trello.
sold me.
You're the best.
Thanks, Trello. Okay, now that we know you a little bit better, we're going to dive into Lively Lewis stories. Wow, Lively Lewis stories. I promise I don't have a list.
We're really testing everybody. All the L's, the S's, the whole thing.
Okay, first, I want to ask, what is your favorite part of creating Lively Lewis stories?
So my favorite thing is being able to have absolutely no limit to creativity. Like when we make videos, I have to be realistic, right? I can't do things that my brain is like, hey, it would be fun. It's like, well, I can't do that. This is real life. There's real, parameters of what we can do. And so with our podcast, like I just love being able to push those limits. I love being able to just let imagination be without boundaries and be able to be like, hey, what if the world was upside down? Hey, what if you went behind Niagara Falls and everything was different? And just being able to give kids the thing of like, I can dream it, I can make it come true. And so that is by far my favorite thing, is not having boundaries and being able to just take my little girl brain and be like, what did my little self like imagine the world to be like? Let's go and see what would happen. And so definitely the creativity without limitations.
I love that that's just how kids' brains are, period, right? And so we get to tap back into that when we try to be creative, or no, when we succeed at being creative.
Absolutely.
And I love that it also shows kids that they don't have to have a limit on their
Right.
imagination.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree. And kids are incredible. I mean, we have on our story, we ask kids like, hey, submit your story ideas. And it is so cool to see so many kids with different ideas, whether they're real life experiences that they're having or struggling with, to just super outlandish, amazing, like just, okay, yeah, a dog and a unicorn become best friends. Like, let's do it. Why not? And it is so, so cool, because then it pushes even me where I start going, okay, maybe I'm getting too into like one area. Then you see that I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of creativity. All right, let's go back there too. So it's very cool.
Definitely. Oh, and I love the idea of having kids help with story ideas, because kids love to like be creative, like we said. And also they love to hear their stories on
Absolutely.
the podcast that they love. So like it's a win-win.
It is so fun. And I wish, I don't know if this will come off sounding weird or not, but I wish I could be like a fly on the wall when the kids turn on their podcast and then they realize it's their story and it's their name in the story, and they're going to get to spend 15, 20 minutes listening to a story that was perfectly captured just for them. Like that just feels so personal. We don't have a ton of ability to connect with our audience in a way that I would love to. But I love being able to like have this idea that like there's someone out there that felt special, that they were like, hey, that's my story. Like that's me. And then they can listen to it at bedtime or whatever. It's a very, very sweet moment. And it's very big for us to be able to feel like we can have that connection with our audience.
Definitely. Making kids feel special is kind of just the best.
It's the best thing in the
I
whole
love
world.
that you get to do that.
I do too. We do not take it lightly.
My kids just need to do a story. They need to submit a story.
Yeah,
I don't know
they
why
do.
They haven't.
Yeah, we got to get them on there.
Okay. I'll add that to the list.
I know someone who can make it into a story. I didn't know them.
It's on your Trello.
It's on my Trello. Exactly.
I should preface this by saying my kids love Lively Lewis stories, and we listen to them. Mostly they listen to them at bedtime, like you were saying, but sometimes we do it. We'll turn them on in the car during a road trip or just running errands when I just need them to not whine at me.
Absolutely.
How does your family or like your group work together to come up with the ideas for the stories? So you did say that like some of them come from listeners, but do all of them come from listeners?
They don't. So I would say we're probably at about a 20% comes from listeners. And then the rest come from me. I started in theater when I was a little girl, and I always loved the theatrics. I always loved the creativity that came with that. But as a fellow mom, it's like I became a mom and just I lost my creative outlet because I can't go and be in a play while I have nursing babies and all of that. And so I found myself in just kind of like, oh, I feel like I'm missing something. And so we started our YouTube channel. And then when we met Mr. Jim at a YouTube conference, he told us about, kids audio. And so I'm like, all of these ideas that I have that I cannot create a YouTube video about was able to have a home. And so with that being said, I'll sit down. I take some of them are personal experiences. Like one of our very, very early, I think it might be our first ever podcast story, was a story that my grandma used to tell us when we were kids. My grandma is the most incredible storyteller. So like we would go camping and every single night she would do 10-part adventure stories. And it would be adventures of Erica and Alexa. My sister's Erica. And so I've always had that kind of example of imagination. And so I would say a huge part of that comes from my grandma. And then, I kind of sit down and think, what stuff are my kids dealing with? Hey, we just moved. Let's make an audio story about that. Kids move all the time. Like, how can we support kids through life changes? And also, let's just have fun. Let's have some crazy safari adventure, where chimpanzees can talk because we can.
Right. The world is your oyster when
Absolutely.
It's a podcast and it's just audio.
Absolutely.
So when we listen, I feel like we listen to a lot of dinosaur stories and a lot of unicorn stories and I was wondering, are those your kids' interests right now? And like, you're just kind of following what they love?
I love it. Yeah. So they, I will say things have changed a little bit. My son Levi is almost 8 and now he is all sports guys. And so he's actually, he's funny in that new transition where he's like, Mom, I'm not really into dinosaurs. Okay. I really like basketball. I'm like, okay, dude, I get it. No problem. And so you'll see as time has kind of gone on from our early stories to kind of where we are now, there is a lot more of kind of capturing their ages now. But when we started, absolutely. My daughter was all princess, all unicorn. My son was all dinosaurs.
That's another beauty of having your own show is you get to choose what you talk about and you might as well make it so that your kids want to listen to it too.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big one. I want to create something. And my kids are my best metric of if we're doing good. My daughter listens every single night and I'm always giving her options. I'm like, hey, who do you want to listen to? Like, giving her all these options. And it really does mean a lot because she does. She listens to our stories every night, which I think aside from other people listening to it, just having her get to listen to her mom tell her a story each night is really special.
Definitely. Yeah. So I know you've been doing this for a while, and I was wondering what has been the most surprising thing or part of starting this like podcast side of your enterprise?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing to me is that, I spoke before when I met Mr. Jim, it was at a YouTube conference that was meant for people in the kids and family space. And it wasn't obviously specifically to YouTube, but I would say 89% of the people there were, there for YouTube. And he was telling us what he did. And I'm like, oh, that is so cool. But I really had a hard time thinking that the kids that are watching YouTube would be the same kids that are listening to podcasts. I really struggled with thinking that there was going to be no overlap. And that's what honestly has been what my biggest surprise is. Of course, we let people know on our YouTube videos that we have this podcast and all that kind of stuff. But the transition of having kids come over has been so incredible. It's been such an amazing opportunity because, like I said before, we don't really have, like YouTube, you have no communication with your audience because there's no comments, there's no nothing. Whereas at least with this, we have the comments on our review page. So we can hear from our audience more. And so it's been so neat watching that transition of kids going from their YouTube over to podcasts because we know as parents, like there's time for video, right? We know, like we watch movies, we watch YouTube videos, we do all of that. But there's a time when it's time to put the screens away. There's only so much time that kids should be spending glued to a screen. And I love being able to offer hey, you trust us over here in YouTube. You trust that what we're putting out there is appropriate, that it is nurturing for your kids. Now we have another place for you to send them when you're like, I'm in the car, or, we're playing Legos, or, whatever. And so, yeah, definitely the transition of bringing kids over has been really cool. I've really appreciated the effort that people have gone to kind of see what we're doing over on the podcast side.
I bet there's more overlap than at least you initially expected, which is fun.
Very much more than I expected. And I think because in the podcast community, from talking to other podcasts, they're like, our audiences are completely different. And so I was prepared going into it being like, okay, no one's going to listen. Because the audio space is different. There isn't an algorithm. There isn't this, we're used to knowing if we do X, Y, and Z and fit into an algorithm, this video will get fed to someone that wants these types of content, right? There isn't that in the audio space yet, And so it is very intriguing to see like, oh no, this is an intentional someone searching us out and listening to us, which is like, that's a big deal. When someone picks you, like they have all of these options and they chose to spend their time listening to us, which, I mean, no higher, praise than that, which is amazing.
Definitely. Yeah. I know that some podcasters don't really love that isn't really an algorithm for podcasts, which, yeah, it's kind of a bummer sometimes. It's harder to get found. But I love, like you said, when people do find you, usually they're looking for you, which means they want to listen to you. It's not like I'm going to pop in front of you and hopefully you're going to like me. It's like, oh no, you already like me because you looked for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, because that's not what we're used to is we popped in front of you before Peppa Pig came on, and hopefully someone's going to stay through it before Peppa takes over type of thing. And so it is. It's very, very different and I think it is interesting because there's not a lot of people like us that do both, that have the experience in both. And so it's funny because I'll talk to people who are in audio only versus people who are in video only, and they're very different. How we approach things are very different. And so it's fun. Like I love having a foot in both worlds.
Totally. Yeah, that would be interesting. Do you have one that you like better, or is it just like you like different things about different ones?
I mean, the PC answer would be, I love them equally. But the truth is, I love the podcast. The podcast is my baby. It is definitely the place where it's like a place where I just feel like it's allowing imaginations to blossom. And I think that it's really hard raising kids in this era because kids don't have to have the imagination that like our generation and generations before had to have. Like my parents were like, you're going to go play in your room with your Barbies for hours on end, have fun. And that's what you do. Our kids, it's like, go play with Barbies. And they're like, oh, okay. How? I'm like, what do you mean, how?
It's true. Well, that is one thing that I say about kid podcasts is that they help kids like work that imagination muscle.
Absolutely.
That they don't have to when they are watching screens.
Right.
And yeah, we also have screen time, but that is limited. While kid podcasts, y'all can listen to them as much as you want all day long.
Absolutely.
And honestly, they're usually just as entertained, at least at our house.
Yeah.
They do have to have like a thing to keep their hands busy.
Yes.
Like magnet tiles, coloring pages, or Legos. That's a big one for my 7-year-old right now. Is he will listen to like Pixel Quest by Mr. Jim.
Yes.
That's his favorite right now.
Yeah, sounds so
Storybutton
good.
also. And just build Legos for like hours. I'm like, where's D? He must still be in his room listening to Kid Pod.
It's so amazing.
Okay, so before we hopped on this call, I asked you what one of your favorite episodes was, and you gave me a lot, but we decided to talk about the enchanting and whimsical cupcake unicorn.
Told you 100 times.
Of course, there was definitely a real unicorn made out of cupcakes playing in our kitchen with you on a rainy summer afternoon. It was such a great story. One of my favorites from you two for sure.
I'm happy you liked it, but it wasn't a story. Yes, Princess Summershine. It's a real cupcake. Unicorn. Dad, play with us.
I loved this episode. I listened to it by myself. The kids didn't even listen with me.
Love that.
Well, and your kids are so fun to listen to. So that was really fun. Where did this story idea come from?
So this story was actually a submission from one of our listeners, and I feel so bad, but I do not have the name of the child off the top of my head, but it came from one of our comments. And I remember reading this comment and I'm like, how am I going to turn this into a story? Like, I mean, I think I have a good imagination, but here we are. This is a unicorn cupcake. And I sat on it and I was thinking about it. And I'm like, okay, we got to do something with this. This is so unique. And so, I kind of came up with kind of an outline for the story and gave it to our story writer, Jill, and she is incredible. And I had this idea of like, you know what? Our audience is used to hearing my kids. They come to our videos for my kids. Me and my husband are just supporting characters to help keep the story going. And I had the idea of like, hey, let's have everyone like use their voices. Like, can we turn it into more of a script, which is what we're typically doing with our videos? Let's see if the audience likes it. And so, yeah, we turned it into a script. And it's my favorite just because I love hearing my kids. I love hearing their involvement in it. I loved watching them actually create it and hearing their little voices as they're trying to do this because it's different than video. And so by far my favorite video because I can hear my babies and it's just it's so creative. There was no way that I could have come up with something like that. And so knowing it was our listener who had this imaginative idea, and then my baby's getting to come in and bring that story together and have that listener who probably loves watching my kids get to hear their voices. It was like, for me, it was the best.
Yeah, like a home run. Hit
Total home run.
Checked all the boxes. Oh, I love that. Okay, so if you haven't listened to this episode yet, just to give you like a synopsis, Ivy wanted to make a cupcake unicorn. They made a big mess making the cupcake unicorn. And then the unicorn came to life and made an even bigger mess. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That feels
Correct.
about right. You should really
you.
listen to it with your kids. All
Thank
of
you.
out there.
That's so sweet.
Oh, okay. So when I listen with my kids to Lively Lewis, I don't usually hear your kids' voices. Is that like, am I just missing the ones with your kids' voices?
No,
Or are they
there's
usually not on
They're
there?
usually not on there. So there's I would say maybe like 4 max of episodes that actually has the kids on there. With them being 6 and 7, it's still a lot. And so when we write them out, it's a lot easier to write them in more of like a storybook format rather than writing them into scripts. And so we try, and especially because we do film and they are part of all of that, I'm trying to have something that kind of they can enjoy that's about them without them having to take on any more responsibilities. Because I want them to just live normal life as kids and not have too much on their shoulders. But they do like it. They're like, every once in a while, they're like, hey, Mom, do we have another one that we can record with you? I'm like, yeah, I will absolutely make that happen. We've done that one, which was a very scripted one where the kids knew what to say. And then we've also done where I'm telling the story and they're sitting with me and I'm asking them questions and like what they think. And so we're trying just different things to kind of just see what the audience likes. But just transparency it's almost always going to be me, just because trying to keep that workload, if you will, from the kids.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think it's really fun to hear the kids, but like you said, kids need to be kids.
Kids need to be
And so
kids.
you can't overload them.
No. And they
I'm glad
do.
that you have that balance.
They do. And they honestly, they work so hard and they love what they do when it comes to the YouTube world. And they love listening to the audio. But I have to kind of I got to be the mom in the situation and be like, hey, you guys also need to just be kids. Go play basketball. Go play. So
Totally. With your Barbies.
with your Barbies
Well, listen
that
to
you're
a
going
good
to figure out how to play imaginatively with.
So I love a short podcast, especially for my kids because their attention is pretty short. This episode is 8 minutes long, and most of your episodes are like 15, like 8's kind of on the shorter side,
Mhm.
if I'm remembering right, like 15, 20 minutes long. Is there a reason that you keep them that short, or is that just kind of like how long the stories end up
It
being?
kind of depends. So when we're getting submissions that are like that one, for instance, we have to kind of rein it in. And it's like, okay, I don't know how far out to go without it then just getting kind of too watered down or too lost in the, details. We've had ones where we just love the idea so much that we end up doing 2, 3, 4 parts to it. Like we did this one called, it was like the Book Fair Chronicles. And that one was a blast because it was a 4-part series. And so we'll do some of those. But yeah, I like my kind of goal is kind of in that 10 to max 20. I think anything past 20 minutes for a kid that's just too long. But we kind of try to stick within that. I don't want them so short because obviously as podcasts are, we have, the possibility of ads and we have our, beginning part that we have the talk and then we have a little ending, whatever those things are called. I should probably know what they're called, but I don't.
Like an intro and an outro?
That's the word. There we go. Nailed it.
I got it.
Yes, our intro, outro is there. And so I feel like if we're putting an intro and outro on every video and they're on that shorter side, I feel like a kid's just like, I just heard that. I don't want to hear that like so quickly. And so we do like kind of in that, I think that 10 to 20 minute, is like the sweet spot for attention span, but also giving like a good, real, like detailed story.
Like a robust story.
A robust story. I like that. Perfect word.
I'm glad I can assist with words.
Yes. Oh, the words, they're not there anymore. Like I think I had my babies and then they took the dictionary out of me and I'm like, do we have words?
Words are hard, especially as a podcaster. I'm like, oh yeah, I have to talk.
Oh my goodness. Well, I have people ask all the time, like, oh, do you just come up with the story on the spot? Like, are you just like going from your head? I'm like, no. I would love that to be able to have that figured out, but absolutely not. I'm like, that has to be word for word written down so that I have somewhere to go with it.
Yeah. I've noticed that if I don't have like a word for word script, I'll just ramble.
Mm-hmm.
And then editing that is so hard. And I don't want to edit that. So
No. Just spending.
Scripts are my friend.
They're so nice. You like know what, or at least like an outline of like what is coming next. Otherwise, yeah, I can go off on a tangent like it's my job.
So this next part, I don't know. I'm trying hard to make talking about money less weird. So I want to ask you money questions, but yeah, it's like a personal thing where I'm like, I need to make talking about money less weird.
Honestly, I think in our world, the financials of how these things work are very they're not understood. And then people are upset because there's an ad and you're like, here's how it works. So yeah, go for it.
I kind of have to make money.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So is this your full-time gig or is this like a side hustle?
So for me, it is mine. So our podcast and our YouTube channel is my full-time gig. My husband also does all of the analytics and a ton of the stuff for our YouTube channel. But he also works as a health insurance agent. So we have a health insurance agency. And so his not fun job is health insurance, but his creative outlet is YouTube.
Okay, cool. And how much money do you guys make in like a year?
So it's tricky. So when it comes to the podcast, it's odd because in order to get monetized on a podcast, you have to sell ad space. And if you don't sell ad space, you don't make any money. So I think so for us right now, our podcast is just in the growth part. We signed on with iHeartRadio as one of their network podcasters, which is amazing, which means that we'll actually start making money once we start selling ad space. We've done a couple, if any of our listeners have noticed, we've had a couple like Spotify for podcaster ads placed before we joined iHeartRadio. But right now we have no ads in there just because we're really just trying to like create the solid like listener experience before we have to start doing that. And plus I'm also really particular about like what ads would be ran on our channel because that's like my biggest thing. We've prided ourselves on being like very protective about our space and making sure that nothing sneaks through. And so we actually do not, at the moment, we don't make anything on our podcast. And
just
so
on YouTube stuff.
Just on YouTube stuff. Yeah. So our YouTube is the one that funds this for now. But it is coming soon though, because we will be starting to run ads on our channel by the end of this year.
Good for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's awesome. And it is hard because we understand. I mean, I see them all the time. Like, oh, I don't want ads on here. Why am I getting fed ads? And I totally understand as like, I mean, it's annoying. It's disruptive and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, we listen. Oh, I forgot. My favorite podcast is Smartless. I don't know why I didn't say that earlier. I listen to that all the time with my husband. Anyways, we listen to Smartless. And so it's like they have ads. These are, it's just unfortunately if you want to do this and you want it to at least pay for itself, you have to run ads, which is a bummer.
It is. Maybe eventually we'll find a different way
Mm-hmm.
to make money on podcasting. But for now, I think that's kind of the main way. Unless you want to do something like on top of the podcast.
Right. Or if you want to
But-
do like subscribers where you actually have them pay for access. But for us, like we never want money to be a reason why someone can't listen. And so we don't put anything behind paywalls or anything like that, just because money should never be a reason why a kid can't have access to, entertainment. So that's just not,
Totally.
we're like, I'm sorry you have to sit through an ad, but at least it's not,
But
behind
then
a
it's
paywall.
free for you.
It's free for you. Yeah.
So, okay. Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you
of
for
course.
talking candidly about money.
Yeah, it's very weird. I mean, it is one of those things, especially within the podcast world, because it is very strange. It's not set up as simply as other ways that like are paid monetarily. Like within Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, all of those have just placed ads. You don't have any control over it. You don't have any say over it. It just gets placed there, and that's how you make money. But with podcasts, it's interesting. And I'm very curious to see what's going to happen now that we are fully signed up with iHeart. And I'm excited to see, like the possibility. Because obviously it costs money to write the stories. It costs money to mix the stories and all of that. So,
Right. Yeah. And like your time is worth money, and you're spending your time recording and even just thinking of the stories. So, yeah.
yeah, it's the not fun side of it. I mean, it's worth it. We hope that, a lot of the stuff when you do this, you really do step out in faith and you're like, I believe this can be something, and we're going to put in the work until hopefully it does. And my hope is just that we can bring in enough that it just pays for us to keep doing it, honestly. Like going above and beyond that, I don't really care about. I just would like it to be paid for so that, it's not coming out of, family budget and all that.
Definitely. Well, and I think if nothing else, your podcast can also point people to your YouTube, which makes money
Absolutely.
easier or more straightforward, at
Yeah,
least.
absolutely. And that's our thing. It's like the more that our name is out there, the more different ways. I mean, we have, we have one piece of merch that we're hoping to expand soon. And so it's like those different ways where we can, and like they thankfully each thing kind of works for itself. But yeah, I mean, we're working on, because of our podcast, we're working on an animated series because a animation company heard it, loved it, and was like, we could turn this into an animated series. So it's little
So
things
cool.
of just like trusting and being like, let's, just put it out there and let's hope for the best. And, if it turns into something, it does. But if it doesn't, honestly, I look at it in like a non-morbid way. Like my kids will have stories of their mom reading to them at the end of the day. Like if that's all we have from it, it's worth it.
Totally. And you get to choose when you're done,
Mhm.
right? Like if you're like, that was awesome, we did the thing, they have stories now. If we need to move on, we will.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great being in control. No one owns us, if you will. We're able to kind of just make our decisions, which I love. Same with like what kind of content we put out. We are 100% in control of that. And so I really appreciate being able to do that.
Definitely. Okay, before I let you go, tell people where they can find you, all the places.
We are on the iHeartRadio app, as well as Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you get podcasts, you can listen to us. We're also on YouTube if you're not wanting to go on any of the other apps. We have an actual Live Lewis Stories page on YouTube as well.
Fabulous. And then social media too, right?
So social media, you can find us on Instagram at Lively Lewis Family, as well as TikTok and Zigazoo as well. We post on there.
Okay, wait, I don't know what Zigazoo is.
Oh, Zigazoo is adorable. It is it's kind of like a TikTok for kids, but it's super controlled, which I appreciate. Everything is manually reviewed by a person to make sure that it is appropriate, but also kids can't just put anything that they want on there because it is being made sure it's safe for all kids. And so, yeah, we're on there as creators, which is really fun.
That is fun. I love that.
It's
Dang.
super cute.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to look into that.
But yeah,
one
we
too.
would love it. Come
That's
over,
another thing to
come
add to the
introduce yourself on Instagram. I love getting to meet. I've had so many moms reach out to me and just send us videos of the kids watching our channel or listening to our stories or with their merch. And like no one bothers me when they reach out to me. I love it. I love when people tell us, that their kids like watching or listening, because for us, we don't really have a lot of connection with our audience, which is very sad. So I love it when people reach out.
I know. That is one of the hardest parts about podcasting. Well, and probably YouTube kids too.
Mhm.
Is just it's hard to connect with your people unless you've got that group also on social media, which is like a
Right.
whole different.
Right, which most people don't translate. I mean, our
No.
Instagram is teeny tiny considering our size on YouTube or the amount of listens we get on our podcast. It's like, this does not translate. But I would love to be able to have more of a connection, because it is really special to be able to hear what people are thinking or what we did do right, or, hey, can you do this differently, or, whatever the things are.
Totally. Oh, and I was gonna say, we found you guys on Storybutton.
Yes.
I think actually I saw you on Instagram too, but my kids found you on Storybutton. So we love Storybutton. You love Storybutton. If any of you out there want a Storybutton, you should definitely get one because they're the best.
They are. Honestly, Storybutton and Jim, the brilliant mind behind Storybutton and what he has created and what his mission is incredible. And we are so honored that we got to be on there. And it is so cool. I mean, to be able to have my kids not steal my phone, not steal an iPad, not have to like figure out, the Amazon or the Siri it's a game changer for sure. They can keep it in their room and I don't have to wonder if they're going to like sneak on over to Minecraft or Roblox or something. Just there.
Yeah. Totally. Okay. I just realized I didn't explain what Storybutton is. It looks like an old-timey radio that has like 6-9 buttons on it and a little screen that just tells you what podcast you're listening to. And my kids, like you said, it just sits in their room. They can listen to it whenever they want. The main time we use it is bedtime, so that it just like helps that transition between me being in the room and me not being in the room.
Absolutely.
And it's the best. And it updates itself. It's connected to the internet. So this is not an ad, but if we just love Storybutton.
We are. And it was really fun is that when Storybutton was kind of getting launched into what creators would be on there, Jim brought me on board to help, because as someone who's very familiar with the creator community, it was a blast. We actually have worked quite a bit on that together and figuring out who comes on to the Storybutton, because right now it is curated for what we've curated for the Storybutton, but the app is coming soon, and that app will allow parents to actually pick what podcasts go on there and what podcasts are not on there. So for people who are like, oh, but it doesn't have this podcast or that podcast, the app is coming soon, which will actually allow for a selective nature on there, which is great.
Totally. I've heard a little bit about that. I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. It's great because everyone has different things that their kids are interested in, and we did the best that, we could as far as like having a good broad spectrum of types of shows on there. But obviously with the amount of podcasts that are available to kids, you're not going to have everything. So it's very cool.
No, it's not possible.
Yeah, it's fantastic though.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
This was blast. Thank you so much for having me. And I love just getting to chat about what we both love to do and what our kids are both into. So it's very fun.
Very fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alexa is such a wealth of knowledge. I'm so glad that I got to chat with her. Here are some of the things I took away from our conversation. First, use a tool to stay organized so you don't have ideas just floating around in your brain, driving you crazy. Alexa uses Trello and she convinced me, so now I use Trello too. It is such an amazing tool. I feel so much more organized, and it really is fun to like click and drag it to the next column when it's ready to go there. It's lovely. I highly recommend Trello. And no, this is not an ad. The second thing I learned is you don't have to have listener participation in every episode for it to have an impact. Alexa only has about 20% of her episodes that come from listener suggestions or submissions, but it's enough for her listeners to notice and to love it and to feel important and special. So if you're trying to build your community, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Start with something small that your community can latch onto and go from there. The third thing I learned is don't let your episodes get too rigid. Try experimenting with different ways of doing things to see what your audience likes. Alexa tries this, especially the episodes that she has her kids involved, telling the story in different ways, from having it scripted with the kids reading the script and she and her husband reading the script, to more of a bedtime story style with her just telling the story to her kids and her kids interjecting cute little anecdotes because that's what kids are so good at. And I love that she is able to try different experiments with episodes and then seeing which ones resonate the most with her audience. The fourth thing I learned is know your audience. I feel like we all know that we need to know our audience, but sometimes we forget. So this is your reminder to know what your audience likes and know what vibes with your audience. In our conversation, Alexa talked about how the sweet spot for her show is 10 to 20 minutes long because she knows that's how long her kids' attention span is, which tells her what her audience likes. The fifth and final thing that I wrote down that I learned from the conversation that I had with Alexa is that the money-making opportunities aren't always going to be ads. It was so fun to hear that an animation company was interested in making an animated series because they listened to Lively Lewis stories. They have this awesome opportunity to do something really unique and fun, and it came before they had ads on their show. So ads are one of the ways that we always think about for making money with a podcast, but it is not the only way to make money with a podcast. Will you share this episode with your podcasting friend who's been struggling with staying organized so Alexa can convince her to try Trello too? Also, as kind of a sneak peek, in next week's episode, you'll hear a conversation I had with Mr. Jim, who we talked about in this episode. He is one of the creators of the kid podcast Pixel Quest. Pixel Quest is one of the favorites at our house right now. My kids listen to it almost every day. You'll learn all about how to use sound to its fullest potential on your podcast. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next week.